10 on the way. I said now, and then Morgan said, don't be afraid, I'm only a little kitty cat.
But will she go crazy?
That is the Anissa Weier we are talking about, a 12-year-old child shivering in an interview room with a trained detective. Not the young lady that sits in court today. Those shades of that child you heard yesterday still remain within her, needing help. While Anissa couldn't stab Payton, in her broken mind, she knew it had to be done. To prove to the unbelievers, to prove she wasn't crazy, and to protect her family from the tall, tentacled figure she and Morgan had seen in the woods near their homes while they were on the bus, in the woods near their friends, and in the woods near their families. She knew that there was danger, and she knew this because, as she told Trissani, the wiki told me. Over and over again, that's what the internet told me. That's what the wiki told me. The wiki, as if the wiki was a person telling her what there was. It doesn't matter what or when Morgan told her about the deal she made with their personal devil, Slender Man. The wiki had already told her that he could read her mind, that he was always watching, that he could be anywhere in the blink of an eye, that he stalked, stole, and strangled children and their families.
Feet to 14 feet tall. He's, like I said, a tall guy who constantly wears a suit with a red tie. He doesn't have a face. His skin is white. And at his own will, he can exploit these tendrils from his back and strangle his victims. And from what the creepypasta wiki said, he targets children most. So I was really scared, knowing that Slender could easily kill my whole family in 3 seconds.
As Detective Trissani said, wow, this sounds crazy. Because it is. This belief was the product of a mental illness, a shared delusional disorder grown between two troubled children whose loose ties to reality had been undone by fake news on the World Wide Web. Together, they drifted deeper and deeper into this belief until, sucked down by the whirlpool of the web, their unformed minds, and their mental health disorders, it eliminated their ability to control their own behavior, to see the strangeness and the wrongfulness of what they believed. You've heard from 3 different doctors that Anissa was suffering from a shared delusional disorder, and that while rare, a shared delusional disorder is a recognized mental health disorder contained in both the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, which is current, and the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 4TR. No wonder they call it the DSM. It's been recognized, diagnosed, and talked about since the 1800s when it was used, when it was described by the French term folie à deux, the madness of two. It develops between 2 or more people involved in a very close relationship, one having a psychotic disorder, and the other eventually developing delusions consistent with the more ill individual. We know Morgan Geyser is schizophrenic, has schizophrenia, one of the most terrible and difficult psychotic disorders known to our society, one that in Middle Ages would have labeled her a witch and burnt at the stake. But we're not in the Middle Ages anymore. We do not treat sick children that way. Morgan's delusions were shared with Anissa over time and grew and grew during their close relationship. Anissa told Trissani and the doctors that she saw Morgan as a sister, and she clung to her for dear life. These 2 children, very alone in the new school that they were starting in, found each other, found shared interests, And those shared interests fueled the fire in Morgan's mind and spread to Anissa. They had time together on the bus, 40 minutes each morning, 40 minutes in the afternoon. They lived in the same condo complex. They played in the park that poor Bill Weier could see from the door of his home, not knowing what was happening. But there's another place where they met, and where many of our children meet. On the internet. With emails exchanged back and forth, as Detective Casey said, at every hour of the day and night. Just because a child is not physically present with another child doesn't mean they are not in communication. It may not be the Vulcan mind control that Morgan Geyser spoke of, but it's an almost instantaneous connection between young people that is beyond, oftentimes, the sight of their parents and their teachers. Morgan's outreach about Jeff the Killer and letting go of logic and accepting Slender Man and Jeff the Killer and this creepypasta wiki as real tells of the development of this disorder in Anissa. Payton's observations of Anissa when she was with Morgan and when she was not also speak about what was happening, as did the report of K.N. on his friend from Flight Academy who came in and told the terrible secret that she heard. Terrible secret that Anissa was planning on becoming a proxy and meaning to kill a friend. Not you, don't worry. But she was worried. And she did what any child would do. She reached out to an adult who said what adults do when children say things that frighten us. Just a kid. Quirky. A joke. Not serious. K.N.'s sister, S.N., heard the conversation between Mom and K.N. and went to her counselor. She sees a counselor several times a week at school because of her own issues. She told her this scared her, it might be a joke. There were warnings. There were signs. And as adults, we whistle past the graveyard because we don't want to see that a child is sick. We want it to be a phase. We want to look away. We don't want to see it because it frightens us too. Because we can't protect them at that point. We can if we react, if we step in, but so often we don't. A parent doesn't want to see it. A teacher doesn't want to tell. It's hard and it's hidden, but we need to be more open about mental illness in our society. We wouldn't be here if we were. You've heard from the 3 different doctors that Anissa was suffering from a shared delusional disorder. You've heard that this isn't just about her being a child, that this isn't just about her having been lonely. This wasn't just a lonely girl giving in to peer pressure, but a delusion strong enough to kill for. Many children have someone they can turn to when dark images and dark thoughts disturb them, someone who can help guide them through. Payton was a perfect example of that. She turned to her mom, and her mom was able to sit down and surf the web with her and show her, this isn't true. Don't worry. Nobody's coming in your window to kill you. But Payton was 12. She still locked her window, slept far away from it, just in case. Anissa's family was not at a point where they could be that resource for her. You've heard about the pain and the emotional bombshells that had hit that home over and over and over again in the 2 years before this occurred. Anissa's father and mother separating and then divorcing, something that disturbed her enough at school that she sought out help in a support group. Mr. Weier's understanding was that she had sought it out herself because she was in pain. Not only were her parents suffering through this divorce, dealing with the stress and the pain that even parents who try very hard to keep it away from the children, you can't hide it from them, they know you. They feel the pain. They see the separation. And their pain is there too. But they can't show it because you're hurting. Anissa's older brother and sister were hurting too. Not because of the divorce between their father and his second wife, but because their mother was suffering the last stages of a terrible illness that had plagued her since she was in high school. She was told you won't make it till you'll be lucky if you make it to 40. Well, 1 week short of her 41st birthday, she succumbed. Annie's older sister had actually skipped out of school. Mr. Weier told you about that. Contrary to his wishes, she skipped school so she could care for her mother in her last illness. And who could blame a teenager for that? And then that pain and that loss is present in Annie's world. In addition to the loss of her nuclear family, her brother and sister are suffering a pain that she can't help. Her father pleads with the younger ones, you have to help them, you have to make sure they feel comfortable, that they're okay. How can she tell? How can she reach out to them that are hurting so much that she's in pain too, that she's lost too? Instead, Annie, when she was at Prairie, reached out to an adult. You heard Mr. Haynes when he came in here. She spent her lunch hours and her recesses talking to him, crying, talking about problems with children, talking about her life. But once she got to Horning, he wasn't there. And Mr. Taggy, clearly, based on the tears at the end of his testimony, clearly cared about this child, but he hadn't had the years-long relationship. He didn't have the connection to Anissa, so this wasn't someone she could reach out to about something other than math problems. And so, all adult ties are missing for her. And she tried. Always the quiet girl, always the good girl, who worked hard, got good grades. The girl who wanted to learn to dance, but when her father told her he couldn't afford to send her to the dance classes, what did she do? She turned to the internet, to YouTube, and practiced dance moves alone in her room, just as she had on her own sought out the depression group at school. She tried to help herself. And as the sadness and darkness within the home grew deeper, and in Anissa grew deeper, she turned further for comfort to the web, to Morgan, and so to Slender Man. Even without an expert, all the evidence tells you this was madness, that this girl could not understand what was going on with her, what was wrong, nor could she stop it. Then when you think of the events of the day, the plan, the description of it as it morphed throughout the day, this meticulous plan that had been crafted over somewhere between 4 and 6 months. We'll use duct tape. Close her mouth when she slept. The only duct tape was what Payton brought as a present. Oh no, let's not do it now. We're sleepy. But they still had to do it. Let's try in the bathroom. You heard Dr. Westendorf talk about the incidents in the bathroom and how, again, it was conditioned on getting Payton to go to sleep, because that way you wouldn't see yourselves in her eyes. And the final incident in the woods where Payton was stabbed. Horrible, yes. Meticulous, no. Madness, yes. Again, when you think of that day and the intense planning that we've all heard about through prior reports, you think of what they took with them. A purse, 2 water bottles, kudos, a peanut butter crunchy bar, and pictures of their families. Why did they take the pictures of their families? Because they truly believed they were never coming home. When you think of the Testimony of Detective Casey when he was on the stand talking about the note that was found on Anissa's phone that he saw as a suicide note when he read it. That's really what it was. She was leaving her family, leaving everything she had to them, wanted them to remember her as she was. She was going to a place in her mind that was dark and dangerous, a place where they needed protection against the other people who would be there. The only protection from Slender Man was, as the list you saw in Morgan's science notebook said, run like hell. They knew that this creature was out there. They believed him to be a danger to themselves, and that's why they had their defenses list. And they believed him to be a danger to any child that was out there and their family. Again, this is delusional, and they acted on the delusion. The difference between a simple delusion and a delusional disorder is that the delusional disorder compels you to act upon it. And it's clear they were compelled to act. To harm a friend, to kill a friend, and to walk all the way to the Nicolay Forest. Years later, when speaking with a doctor, Anissa defined it as about 4,000 miles. We know when she spoke with Trasani, she said she knew it was a long, long way, and that she'd done an internet search that showed it was 200-some miles and would take 2.5 days to get there. A 12-year-old child sitting in the interview room knows it's a long way, doesn't know what the number is. 15-year-old child talking to a doctor doesn't either. The 3 doctors who evaluated Anissa to assess her mental responsibility each brought different experience and evaluation tools to bear in this analysis. Dr. Caldwell, with years of experience evaluating and treating violent youth, brought internationally to teach other countries how to take care of their children. Does objective tests, studied tests, to determine a good objective viewpoint of the 12-year-old child who sat before him. She was smart. You can be mentally ill and smart. She was smart. She had a processing delay that made understanding complex information difficult. That fits in well with Ms. Reinder's description of how hard she worked, but how she had difficulty decoding, I believe was the phrase she used, accessing information within things that she read. It also fits with Mr. Tagi's description of the extra time Anissa took in processing redirection. Unlike other children, she would have to sit, her face would go blank, stew on it, and then do what had been asked of her. Dr. Caldwell also saw diagnosable mental illnesses, depression, an underlying schizotypal disorder, which left her vulnerable to delusional beliefs and the developed delusional disorder. And keep in mind, Dr. Caldwell saw her a month and a few days after her arrest, saw her at the West Bend Detention Center. All the doctors, I think, were clear that they saw her at the detention center. Mr. Zapakowitz even asked, that's where you saw her. So they saw her while she was being... They saw her, Caldwell saw her in 2014 there. Westendorf and Van Rybrook saw her in 2016 there. And Caldwell and Van Rybrook saw her in 2017 in the West Bend Secure Detention Facility. Dr. Caldwell brought the experience of using actuarial instruments to talk about Anissa. Dr. Westendorf, who's worked in prisons and detention centers and mental health facilities, has a practice that is now specializing in looking at the effect of technology on our children, which I think we all can agree played a role here. Dr. Van Rybrook, the director of Mendota Mental Health Institute and a UW-Madison professor who teaches not just psychologists, but who teaches lawyers what the meaning of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect is. Also familiar with adolescent brain development. Dr. Van Rybrook and Dr. Westendorf were appointed by Judge Boren to take a look at Anissa and determine her mental responsibility. Both are duly trained as doctor and lawyer. Van Rybrook's familiarity with the development of a child's brain led him to describe how the early stages of adolescent development, when Anissa was 12 years old, created a whirlpool of impulsive judgments, swirling her deeper and deeper into the delusion, not allowing her to withdraw from its hold. Dr. Westendorf noted that as the internet searches for proof increased, so with the information the web would vomit back into their feeds. Further evidence that fueled their delusions. All three experts had access to the police reports and the full recorded statements of the girls, both Morgan and Anissa. They had the reports generated about Anissa regarding her competence early in the proceedings, whether or not she could understand legal process, and the reverse waiver reports. State asked about that. The doctors, they had access to that, and that information about Morgan as well, to give them the full picture of what was going on with these children. All three interviewed Anissa, and all three, independent of each other, found the same disorder, a delusional disorder. Found that this behavior was driven by mental illness, and all three agreed that the delusional disorder kept her from being able to conform her conduct to the requirements of law. Dr. Caldwell, who saw Ani a month and a few days after her arrest, also found that while she might have understood it was illegal, her need to protect others was so strong she could not understand the action was wrongful. Dr. Van Rybrook and Westendorf felt she couldn't conform her conduct, in part because she saw herself as serving a greater good, the protection of her family. And I think when you look at those conclusions, that factors in not just all of the information they received about Anissa and Morgan, but the fact that, as you heard Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Van Rybrook testify, they went to the websites that these girls looked at. They looked and saw the proof that Anissa and Morgan had relied upon. Dr. Caldwell referred to it as being the same sort of information that when he's looking at reports, when he's trying to create a report, the same sort of information that he would expect to look at. Police reports, doctors' reports, witness accounts, all of these fake news floating out there on the web. If we as adults can't figure out what's true when we look at the web, how much harder for a mentally ill child? You all know this is an unusual case. You've been asked not to determine what happened because Anissa told Trasani what happened. And she entered a plea in front of Judge Boren in the first phase of this case. Now, you've been asked to come here and determine why Anissa did this, and based on that, what we as a people think should happen to her. The jury instructions that the judge just had up on the screen tell you that I must show you to a reasonable certainty by the greater weight of the credible evidence that on May 31st, 2014, Anissa Weier had a mental disease or defect, and that because of that mental disease or defect, she either lacked substantial capacity to understand the wrongfulness of her conduct or to conform her conduct to the requirements of law. And yes, I am reading that off a paper because, like the full diagnosis that Dr. Westendorf gave for Anissa, I can't just spit that out. If I'm trying to think about what reasonable certainty means, though, I look at it in a medical context. If I went to a doctor and he ran tests and he told me I had cancer, I might want a second opinion. In fact, I would want a second opinion, and I'd want to hear that that was wrong. But if I went and got the second opinion, and that doctor said, no, You got it. He's right. I think I would understand that I needed to start treatment. But if I didn't, and I sought another evaluation, and that third evaluation told me, yes, you have cancer, I would hope I would have the common sense to be reasonably certain that I'd best start dealing with it. You have 3 doctors, well qualified by both education and experience, to make this opinion, and that's what they've told you, looking at everything. Not just what the police looked at, but also looking at the information on the web to understand where these children's minds were at. We know the police had access to that. You saw the list of websites, the list of links that Detective Casey had Detective Carpenter pull up for him. Both of them admitted that wasn't all that was there, but that's what they bookmarked, but didn't go to. The doctors did look at that and factored that into their analysis. Evidence has the greater weight when it has more convincing power than the evidence opposed to it. That kind of makes sense. As long as it's evidence that fits with reason and common sense, it tells you it's worth believing. In this case, the only evidence you have is that Anissa Weier meets the standard to be found not criminally responsible by reason of mental disease or defect. 3 doctors have diagnosed her with a mental disease or defect, a delusional disorder. They explained that the delusion was so strong, it prevented Anissa from conforming her conduct to the requirements of law. Dr. Caldwell, who saw her less than 2 months after the offense, also believed that while she knew it was illegal, in the bigger scheme of things, she did not understand the wrongfulness of it. The doctors came to these conclusions after reviewing all the information, including the entirety of the recorded statements. And again, as I said, perhaps most importantly, they also looked at what was feeding into these children's head while they were learning about Slender Man, about creepypasta, about life at Slender Mansion, in the Nicolay forest that they were walking to that. They knew what was said by both girls. They knew from the police report, and I believe Dr. Van Rybrook, or it might have been Caldwell, saw also the statement of Payton. They had all of that evidence. They're not confused about it. They looked at the whole picture. Their conclusions are based on all that was a part of this offense, seen through the eyes of training and experience in evaluating children. The fact that the state doesn't like their conclusions isn't evidence. The state doesn't agree with them, but that isn't evidence. There is a natural tendency when a child is hurt, as Payton was, to want vengeance. But vengeance isn't justice, and we are here as a part of the justice system. Vengeance is an appeal to passion and prejudice, an appeal to ignore the facts and the law. The state is asking you to do that. And the judge has told you, you cannot do that. You must apply the law and the facts as you've heard them in this room. Vengeance is understandable desire here, but justice is what we as a society have decided is the right thing. Justice balances the needs of all to come to a result that as a people we have decided is good and right. That's why we have a law that says when someone commits a crime because they have an illness that makes them unable to either stop themselves from doing the wrong thing or even understanding that the thing is wrong, that we commit them and place them in an institution for treatment. Judge Boren has told you that you have a choice to either convict and criminally punish or confine to an appropriate institution. There is no walking away for Anissa. There is no loophole that she gets out of. There is a consequence. There has been for the past 3 years. And it will continue one way or the other. But it is your choice which is the right consequence. And the evidence has shown you that the right thing is to find her not criminally responsible and commit her to an institution. Thank you.